well-known professional turners, and just as I was retiring, so it worked out as a good time for me to change my thought process and get into something that's creative, rather than trying to do everything on a computer. So, alrighty, so thank you everyone, and Paul will be demonstrating tonight. We've got desk clocks over here, and we also have decorative Christmas trees.
So I thought I'd tonight do a tree, and I brought some samples of trees that I've done relatively recently. Tom mentioned I was at an art show in Batavia yesterday. I have a couple of wood turning friends, and we try to sell our stuff. I made these in an effort to put them out in the market and test pricing and things like that. You'll see there's coloring, there's texturing, there's design. My trees over the years, I've gotten better at not making just straight trees, but having some curves to it. Very intentional. Yes, sir?
Are they by eye or do you measure?
I do take a ruler out, and I kind of eyeball
Yeah.
an inch and a half or whatever else. It's not precise, but as I'm using my tool to put that initial cut in there, I try to even them out a little bit. The challenge is always with this one.
Yeah, and then taper the curves to fit. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll go through that step.
Beautiful, thank you. What are you finishing with?
Depends on the wood. The question was, what kind of finish do I use? It kind of depends on the wood. Some woods, like the more absorbent woods, oaks and things like that, I'll put a coat of Deft lacquer, and I'll just brush that on with a small brush, and then I'll wipe that off immediately. I'll wipe it off, and then while it's still kind of wet, I'll put an oil and use a steel wool on that, kind of slurry that around a little bit, and then wipe that off. And then depending on how that finish works, put another coat or so. But then there are others that I just simply will use Deft lacquer right out of the rattle can and spray that. And that's another thing that you get better at the more you do with the cans, is to get it even and not to get it blotchy and splotchy. So those are just some that I made over the last 3 or 4 weeks to get ready for the show. Those are the shapes. And I try to use different woods. This is actually a Mora wood, which is really a beautiful wood. This is oak, and I did some texturing and some burning.
They're beautiful.
Thank you.
It is.
Thank you.
Have to watch for the knots. Huh?
I actually try to use the knots in the design. I like to find them and highlight them. I think if it's a pure, straight color, it gets kind of boring. In fact, that's how the blue one started out, as a box elder, and it was kind of a boring box elder. There wasn't a lot of pink in it, and I decided to put some blue dye on it. And I don't do a lot of coloring. I just kind of wiped on some blue dye, kind of wiped it off, and then I thought it needed a little line, so I put a little silver metallic marker line around there to just sort of accent that. My wife loves that blue one.
I like the texture.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Dark.
Use one of those rotating bit tools.
Yeah, so I use a couple of different techniques for the texturing, but I wanted to kind of get the technique down. I do some natural edge things. I find that I have a little lake house in northern Wisconsin, and I do a few shows up there, and the more, I call those contemporary trees, not as popular, but the natural edge trees, now this happens to be honey locust, and it was a nasty log. It had one branch coming out this way and 2 branches coming out this way, and it's as hard as a rock. And I ended up doing an off-center turning, so you'll see it was not, because I thought it needed something. So I like to play with things, and I don't really think it looks kind of like a mushroom. I call it an evermush. It's like an evermush. But making mushrooms kind of the same thing. You could texture it, come up with all kinds of different shapes. But the attention to detail and the attention to finish that's what I take pride in. You know, I don't like to leave scratches. I don't like to leave, sanding marks. And I do like to try to get better with the shapes and the designs. And there are certain shapes and designs that are more appealing than others when you look at things, as we know, as wood turners.
Do the natural edge sell better than the more finished
With
ones?
some people,
Depends.
but what I find is when you sell natural edge, make one 6 inches, one 8 inches, one 10 inches, and group them together. I find that people like to buy them
The set.
a set with the natural edge, whereas the other one's more like individual.
Standalone,
Yeah.
Do you use the same wood for that set?
If I have it,
Okay.
if I have a longer log of, say, birch or whatever wood that'll keep some of the, I have paper birch and it's hard to keep the birch bark on it.
Yeah.
I kind of have enough wood laying around where I don't turn a lot of green wood. Most of it's pretty dry. That piece that you've got right there, that was a pretty dry piece of, what is that, mulberry, I think it is?
Yeah.
And it's got a few little cracks in there, and I try to convince people, that that's a natural thing. I'm not worried about a few little cracks. This is cherry, and I'll turn this into a tree. And this afternoon, just kind of getting ready for that, I said, okay, I'm gonna take this. I had 4 exact pieces, this size. It's about 2 by 2 by, I don't know, 8. And the first thing I do is put it between centers, and I'll do that, and make it round, and put a tenon on it. And that's what this will be. And then I put this into the chuck, because I like to hold it in the chuck, because then I'm gonna be tapering this thing, and eventually I'm gonna lose much grip on that end, because I want that tip to be a nicely shaped point, and not where I have to cut it off and make it look flat. So this is like, start with that. It's nice and dry. Turn it round, put a tenon on it. Once it's in the chuck, I start to do this with the roughing gouge, the spindle roughing gouge, and I'm looking for, this is where you get the nice shape. If you make it straight, you can make a nice looking tree, but it'll be, so this step is where you get the really nice design flow, and where over time your eye will take you there. And when I do these, I always feel like I'm taking away too much wood. Like, but I had so much wood here. But right, wood turners want to try to get the most out of every piece of wood. And I used to do that with bowls, and I had bowls that were really nice and fat and squared off, and I used a lot of it, but it wasn't a very nice design. And over the years, I've learned that, again, it's just wood, right? So make the work talk to you, and use the design that, is really going to be pleasing to you and to whoever looks at it. And this is where, and I can actually take that even in a little more. This point right here is kind of a critical point. But once you have that, and you can see I have lines here that I measured out. These happen to be 1 inch apart, but you can make them 1.25 inches. I usually, okay, they're 6 inches. I'm gonna make 6 sections. They're 1 inch. But you can adjust that when you're doing, the detail. And I kind of say, okay, the black part is where I'm gonna use my parting tool to remove that underneath the tree to define the bottom of the tree. And I'm gonna leave myself some room here, because I have to cut this out of the chuck at a certain point near the end, or 1 inch. But you can adjust that when you're doing, the detail. And I kind of say, okay, the black part is where I'm gonna use my parting tool to remove that underneath the tree to define the bottom of the tree. And I'm gonna leave myself some room here, because I have to cut this out of the chuck at a certain point near the end when I'm done. So I just put a few lines on that, but these lines are gonna go away as soon as I start doing that.
Could you
And then-
pass that piece around?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll pass all 3 of these around. These are kind of the steps. And this, there's no sanding on this. This is off the tool. So it's sort of like square, 1, 2, 3. But I'm gonna do the whole thing starting with this one. please feel free to shout out questions.
I noticed in the tailstock that what you're using there that's to grip it even better.
Yeah, so the two, thank you. So I have this is a Vicmark chuck, and I actually have a drive center here with this, it's got a spring-loaded tip in here. So when I'm done and I put the tenon on this side, then I can just take that out and put it right in that chuck. I don't have to take the chuck off or take the center out, or I have to take the center out of this. But I'm minimizing the amount of changing stuff here by using this center in the jaw chuck, the chuck jaws.
Yeah.
And it's just a regular center, you just have it clamped.
It's a center that is made to be held
Okay.
in. It's not a Morse taper.
Okay,
It's in fact, I'll just,
yeah, that's all right, I understand.
it's just, and you'll notice that I'm doing things opposite here, because this is a Vicmark chuck that was made for the Australian market. So it's not righty-tighty. It's lefty-tighty. The Australians do it backwards, but it's got a kind of a squared off.
Where'd that come from?
I think probably Craft Supplies. Easy Wood makes things like this too. Easy Wood has just come out with a new, if you make bottle stoppers and it's a 3/8 inch thread,
Photograph, thank you.
they actually have a drive center that's similar to that, but also has a 3/8 inch thread. You can use your chuck and then put that in there as well. It just came out. If you go to Easy Wood
Thank you.
Tools, you're welcome. The important thing is when you put this in to make sure that it's in straight.
Okay.
And again, I'm lefty-tighty. And there are times when, because I have, most of my chucks are righty-tighty, where I do mess up and I go in the wrong direction. All right, so I have found the center. I use a center finder and I work it in off all four corners. So then I put with a pointer, I make a little spot in the middle. And I just put this on here, kind of spring load it, sneak up the tailstock. Just one thing to keep, this, by the way, the live center is it's a STEB live center. So it's got multiple points on the live center side. I'll show you when we take it off. One thing to keep in mind when you are using a live center is to make sure that your quill that comes out of your tailstock is about 2 fingers wide, because if it's retracted back like this, but it's not out that far, it's probably not holding that taper in there tight enough. It might just be in there, but it's going to be loose. So make sure that you've got at least a couple of fingers worth close to that, where that taper's nice and snug in the tail, and then lock it down. I didn't have to apply a lot of pressure to have it set on the drive side. And very unique. All right, so I'm just going to make it round. I prefer to turn things fairly fast. And you could use spindle roughing gouge, but this wood is so dry and it's cherry, and you could get some nice slivers coming at you using the spindle roughing gouge. I use a bowl gouge, relatively. I don't know if that's might be hefty. I like to work from the left side to the right side. In my shop, I always have a mask on, and using some eye protection on top of my glasses. I usually wear these. They go right over my glasses. They also have a vent on the top, so I'm not getting a lot of heat. I think those are still available. And when I'm not doing big stuff, I usually just wear a mask like that. So my goal right now is just to remove quite a bit of wood, make it round. I do want to say this lathe has gotten a lot of good wear, good honest wear. All of your lathes. Sometimes you walk into shops and they're as clean as the day that they were purchased. This is a club that uses their stuff, so I commend you for having that. All right, so this is pretty much round. A little bit more over here. Let's slide that in there a little bit. I'm always keeping that distance between the tool rest and the project appropriate for the tool. Some tools, and you can see how low I have my handle here, so that I'm right in the bevel of this tool. My handle is all the way down there. I am not scraping like this, although you could. If you were using a spindle roughing gouge, your tool would be up a little bit. If you're using this tool, you wouldn't have it down as low. So for me, the bowl gouge takes, when you start out in a square, it takes some smaller bites. And now the spindle roughing gouge does a nice job finishing that up. All right, so now I want to put a tenon on. This is going to be the bottom of the tree. That's going to be the top of the tree. And there are a lot of ways to do that. You can use a parting tool. You can use a spindle gouge. I have a fairly large scraper, and I use that to just flatten out the bottom. And then to make the tenon that's appropriate for my chuck. And when you make a tenon, and let's just say you want to make a tenon that's a ½ inch or so, you don't necessarily go in and take the full ½ inch. You just kind of come in and take 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch until you get to the size you need. And in this case, I want it to be a little smaller. Is this showing up okay on the video screen? Okay. And you don't need a big tenon. In fact, if you look at the size of the jaws, you know, the tenon at most is going to be from the top of this surface to the top of this surface, you know, inside. At most, it's going to be that big. If you make a tenon that's longer than that, it's going to force the piece to be out further, and it's not going to be flush against the bottom, and that's what you want. You want a good grip here and flush here. I know I'm repeating this for a lot of you guys, but I've seen people who are newer and they always want to put a bigger, it's like the bigger that tenon, the stronger it's going to be, and it's just the opposite. Because if you make this wider than this and it's not, you know, it's not using this top surface for stability, it's not going to be stable. So I also use this skew to very quickly put the angle on my tenon that's going to fit my jaws. So actually should lift that up a little bit. I usually want this tool to go in fairly straight, and the tenon is tapering in from the outside, this surface, inward toward this surface. And it's not a real steep angle, just about like that. So the important thing is an appropriately sized tenon to fit your jaws, appropriate depth, and a flat surface here, because that flat surface is going to give you stability. So now this is ready to be turned around. So I'm putting this in now. Now I could just automatically tighten this as tight as I want to do it, but for some reason when you turn wood around, it doesn't always line up the way it did when you had it this way, you know, the other way. So what I usually do is I put it in the jaws, and then I sneak this up, and I put it back in the center, and then I tighten this down, and I push that in. So now this has pushed this so that it's nice and tight and flat here, and it's gonna be true. It's gonna run true. If I would have just put it in without using this to help me recenter it, it might be off, and which would mean I just end up with a skinnier tree. It would still work, but you end up with a skinnier tree. All right, so now at this point, I still have a lot of wood to remove, and I'm gonna use the spindle roughing gouge to do that. And I start out at this end. Again, this is gonna be the top of my tree over here. And I simply am just removing, and the speed, I was talking to Mike earlier when we started setting up tonight, I pay no attention to the speed. I guess this speedometer is not working anyways, but I listen to the speed, and I listen and I watch to see how the tool is cutting on a particular piece of wood. Some of those really hard, dense woods, I would turn the speed down. For cherry, you can hear it, and it's cutting nice, and it's cutting consistently. I did sharpen my tools before I left the shop today. You see, I'm mostly moving from left to the right. You can go from right to left, but I have a tendency when I come this way, I lift up my tool, and I end up getting a catch that I don't want. So most of the time, I'm just moving from left to right. And in my mind now, I'm starting to see the tree come to shape. I'm also trying to define, okay, how tall do I want that tree to be? How much room do I need for the trunk? How much space do I need for the base? I'm starting just by pretty much doing it straight, and as I get closer to the bottom of the tree, I start to put in this curve, and then I'll go back out here and blend it a little bit. And I think this gives me enough room here for my trunk and my base. Then I'll go back to here and start to blend it. And this is where your muscle memory, your eye will take you into that curve. And it feels like I'm taking away a lot more than maybe I should. But I'm not. Now the wood is getting smaller, and I can feel my tool is kind of coming up over the top now, so here I may need to lower the tool rest a little bit to get the right angle. And I'm also gonna lose this big honking tool rest. So now I'm just pressing a little less aggressively, trying to get a little bit of a smoother flow. I don't want to push too hard on the top here because I'm going to need enough meat. So I think that's pretty good. There are times, depending on the wood, where I might go back at this point with a skew to get a nice smoother finish. Or I might even come at this with a sandpaper, maybe even 120 grit, something like that, so I have a nice smooth flow. I'm just going to use the skew. And with the skew, I turn it down a little bit. I just want to use the bottom part of that skew. And that lets me get in here a little closer too.
That skew, by the way, that's a tool that I'm a bit fearful of. It's gonna.
Yeah, I think the AAW and other organizations want people to be afraid of the skew for some. But if you watch British turners, Australian turners, they're all using skews, and it's one of the most versatile tools you can use. And you see them doing beads and coves and everything. I'm not that good, but I'm not afraid of it. And if you get a few catches and you figure out, well, why did that happen? It happened because this part of the tool is what digs in. If you stay on that bottom half, or say the bottom third, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And yes, I'm using this type of grip and controlling it this way, and I'm also holding it this way, so I'm giving it quite a bit of support with both hands.
You'll notice he's got the handle in pretty close to him too.
Yeah, and with the wider part of the tree, maybe even be a little bit higher than when you come down here. I'm just trying to pick up the curve. And again, this is not really, I'm not looking for a final finish. I'm looking for it to taper and have a nice, fairly smooth finish. Because I'm going to go in there with a pencil and mark it off and then use a spindle or a skew to make those different levels. All right, so like I said on the one that went around, I'm gonna kind of make the bottom of my tree about there. Then I'm gonna leave some space here and remove this. That's where the trunk is gonna be. And then I have to part this out of the chuck. Or when I'm done, I have to saw that out. My technique is I part it as far as I feel safe, and I may still end up with a saw for the last little nub. But I want to leave some room here to get a parting tool in. And this part will be the base, and I'll play with that base, make it round or squared off or angled. And here's where I asked about kind of measuring things off. It's about 6 inches or so. So if I I'll mark it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And it's gonna be 5 plus maybe about half of this. Keep in mind this is spring loaded over here, so that point is gonna be going in. I have to allow for that spring loaded point. Otherwise I'll have a hollow in the top of the tree. So I want to make sure I leave a little bit more over there. Yes, I've tried that. Or actually, that one tree has a ball on the top, right? That's actually part of the tree because I I started to make the top one and it was just too long. And I said, well, I have enough room to put a ball on that. And I also said, well, now it went from to sort of a practical tree to art, right? I have a red ball on top. It also went from just being a tree to being a holiday tree, right? Just that one little ball changed it. So, you know, people just buy the stories, right? When you have a piece, people like to buy a story. So come up with good stories. So I'm just gonna go through and find, and here's where you can adjust them or tweak them, and your eye will help you kind of even them out if you didn't get them right the first time. So right about there. So after I mark those, you can use a regular, this is an old kind of a Craftsman, like a 1/8 inch parting tool. You can do that. I tend to, with the smaller trees, I'll use the smaller thickness parting tool. This happens to be a Chris Stott high-speed steel. You can make your own. I'm sure Bill has made his own. And I'm going right at the line. And I'm setting, and I want this to be at a high speed because I'm kind of setting the depth for how much that undercut's going to be at each of the levels. So I'm going in maybe 1/8 of an inch. As I get to where the tree is a little thinner, maybe not quite 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less there, and maybe a little less there. But I'm really defining the bottom of each of the layers with this, at least initially. Now the next step is to either come in with a spindle gouge, or if you're good with your skew or some combination of, as you get in the corners. I tend to do the bulk of it with a spindle gouge. This is a 3/8 inch spindle gouge, kind of nicely sharpened, fingernail grind. And I usually start at the bottom of the tree and work my way up, keeping it at a pretty high speed. And I don't try to take the whole swoop. I kind of work it in sections. So I'll work from here to here. And when I end up, I'm ending up really at the bottom of where that thin parting tool set the depth. I'm trying to get real close so that it's right about where that parting tool set the depth. Does that make sense?
You're turning that spindle gouge too, the fluke on it, right? As you get
Yeah, so again, we talked about the skew, but I'm basically using this bottom part of the skew, or bottom part of the spindle gouge, as at the same type of orientation that you would use the skew. That angle going in there. And if I went straight in this way, I would nick the bottom of this next one. And there's a little bit of tear out from the tool to begin with, but I'll come back from that and I take a little bit off each corner when I'm done. So right now, I'll just take each of those levels. And again, your eye will help you with the shape. You might make a straight section. You might make a little bit of a concave section. You might even do a convex section. And as you're going down there, you're working it and making them consistent. Section a little high. So again, I work it in sections, usually 4 or 5. You see I've got my tool handle down pretty low, and I've got the tip up. That looks pretty good. It's got a little bit of a curve to it. I'm looking for consistency in those curves. This tool rest is a little awkward for me. My tool rest at home, I can get behind it and kind of push with my thumb. And keep in mind that as you get thinner and thinner with the shape, the speed, the surface speed is slower and slower, right? So the surface speed down here is much faster than the surface speed here. So this is a good place to turn up the speed a little bit, but this is as fast as we're gonna go without moving the belt. I'm up all the way. But just keep that in mind when you're shaping. It may seem like the tool's not cutting as well as you get smaller. It's because the surface speed is slower than it was back here.
I'll talk a little bit about the left hand, how your thumb and index finger are working underneath and pushing along. And
Yeah, so I'm holding the tool up here. I mean, these tools are long. And when I see videos on YouTube and I see somebody turning like this, I know it's time to watch somebody else. Because people who are turners and they are confident and they're comfortable and they know how to use tools, they're right here. And I've got control of the tool. I'm holding it at this kind of beefy part. You'll notice this is an easy wood handle. This is not an easy wood tool. I just got a free handle at a garage sale and I drilled it and put the spindle pouch in it. So easy wood, you know.
don't
but-
ask where the rest of it went.
No, I wish I knew where the rest of it went. But I'm applying pressure to the tool rest always. You got to be on that tool rest. I am riding the bevel of this tool always. And I'm, because it's such a beefy tool rest, I can't get behind it, but I'm using my thumb and this hand to actually provide the motion from left to right. For the most part, I'm doing this too, but stabilizing it from going this way and just pushing it that way. And there's still there's a little bit of cleanup to do, and I'll go back over all these to show how to do that. So again, this is up as fast as it goes. And I'm just like I'm trying to get a nice curve, I'm also trying to get these proportionately the right size, the right diameter as I go down. Because I think, again, your eye is going to help you make sure that they seem to be proportionate. The last piece here, I don't quite go all the way to the top at this point because I need that support for a while. So I am going to thin it down. Maybe even take it down a little bit. But this cherry just cuts so nice. And again, my eye is taking me that this is gonna be maybe that long when we're done. Let's just leave that there for a while. Okay, so shape-wise, we're starting to get a nice shape. If I want to come in here and clean up, because I'm not able to get that spindle gouge quite all the way to that corner. Come in here. Get that all the way in. All the way in. And then even this. Now I also go in this way with the skew and the long tip, and I'll take it in the right order here. Come straight in to help define a line right underneath each of those layers and to clean up some of the fuzz. So that's pretty good. While I have the speed up and while I'm in the neighborhood, this is where I typically kind of come in at a little bit of an angle and just take the sharp edge off of each of these layers. Just enough so that when I start sanding, I'm not going to end up cutting myself on the sharp edge. And I think it adds a little to the design. And I try to make those bevels kind of proportionate too. So when you look at them, this one looks like it could be a little bigger. This one too. So again, it's pretty smooth, coming right off the tool. At this point, I go back, I still need to create the bottom of the tree. So, when you're using the parting tools, just make sure you give yourself room and don't get that tool stuck in there. Work on either side of the tool, give yourself room. Underneath the tree, I tend to kind of angle a little bit under the tree and then work. Now I'm going to leave it fairly thick, but one of the things that I also try to do is I think the thickness of the stump, if you will, needs to be proportional to the tree itself. So sometimes I see people turn trees and the tree is like this, but proportionally it's like 2/3 of the width of the tree underneath there. To me, that doesn't work. So my mind's eye is telling me it should be maybe about 1/3 the size of the bottom of the tree. That's kind of what I shoot for most of the time, about 1/3. And you'll see there's a little bit of roughness there from using the parting tool on that edge right here. And that goes away using the spindle gouge. Just take away that little edge right there. All right, so now I also want to define the bottom of the base. You can play with that, you can adjust it. But right about here is where I'm going to part this thing off eventually. And as Bill said, he would have done it a different way, but there are a lot of different ways for things to work. Here's where I tend to...
Another thing, when you ease up all them corners, most turners want a sharp corner, but in finishing, a little softer corner holds the finish better.
Yeah. And there's nothing worse than finishing up a tree and then you see a little nick out of one of these layers.
Yeah.
Or you're putting a finish on and your rag or your paper towel gets caught on a little thing.
That's not normal?
I've never had it happen. I've heard that happens. So again, I still have to sand, and I still have some opportunities to do some designy things. And again, when it comes to these, you may decide to make this bigger, a little smaller, a little smaller, a little small. You know, there's a lot of different ways to design your trees. Personalize them, make them your trees. Same thing with the base. Some people like squared off bases, some have like totally round ones, some are, you know, tapered. I kind of work in, same idea. I don't want a base that's just as wide as the bottom of the tree. I think it's got to be smaller, maybe a third smaller. It kind of works, but I play around with it. So same thing here to start out. Now I'm just using the same 3/8 spindle gouge. I'm reducing the diameter here. I want it to be heavy enough so it's going to support the tree.
Talk a little bit about rolling that piece like that.
Yeah, so I'm using, in this case, I'm using the left part of the spindle gouge, and I'm taking the corner off of this. This gets back to beads and coves. I'm rotating the tool, I'm raising the handle up, and I'm lowering the tip of that tool as I go. And I'm also reducing the diameter of this base. This is also a good time to go back and work on the diameter of the trunk. I'm getting a shadow over here. Let's see if I can get this. You can still get that? So, and again, it's all about proportions. I don't want a trunk that's too long. I think it looks a little awkward if there's too much of it showing. Like I said, I'm trying to go underneath that bottom a little bit. I don't want it to be too fat. I don't want it to be too skinny. I don't want it to be too long. And you can certainly use other tools. I'm going to refine the shape of that. So you'll notice, in order for me to use this tool inside here, I had to create space between the bottom of the tree and the top of that stand. So sometimes necessity will determine how long that trunk is going to be, depending on the tool. You can get the straight, you can get something like that in there. You can get your parting tool in there to give yourself some space, so that you can get your spindle gouge in there to end up refining that. Make sense? So now I can go back here a little bit to the very bottom. I'm not going to part it off obviously yet, but I want to see where the bottom of that base is going to be. I think I'm pretty good with that. Okay. So we've got I think a nice tree, a nice shape. We could play with that a little more, but That works good.
If you were texturing it, at what point would you have textured?
Yeah, so right now I would sand it and then texture it. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna kind of pick up the pace a little bit. I'm gonna use some, yeah, let's do this. I've got this handy dandy kit of sandpapers. This is not the highest quality sandpaper, but it's pretty convenient to have it in the box. So when you're sanding, you kind of turn the speed down a little bit. I'm just trying to remove any tool marks, sanding scratches. I'm not using it to shape the tree. Just tweak it a little bit if I have to. And you'll see with my left hand, I am constantly feeling, you know, the wood and the scratches. And I'm also supporting it because I'm applying a little bit of pressure in that direction, and this offsets the pressure that way. But your question was very timely because you don't want to think about applying a texture or even a burn wire after you part that off, after you part the tip off. Because now you've lost the support on that end of the tree. So you definitely want to do that before we finish up the tip. Okay, so again, just kind of, so we're at 400. And if I'm gonna do burning with wire or something like I had on some of those, this is where I would go right in right now with a very, very nicely sharpened skew tip or some other sharp pointy tool. I have a tool like this that's, you know, it's not good for much else except make little points into things. But when I do texturing with the texturing tools, I usually want to do the lines after the texturing because it may drift over a little bit, and I want to be able to define that space with that tool. If I did that first, then you got to keep that tool in that slot. Not always going to happen. And I think these are from Craft Supplies out in Utah.
Oh.
This is 3/8 by 12, so there's 12 TPI. This one is 3/8 by 16, so 3/8 wide, 16 teeth per, I don't know if it's per inch or per revolution. And this one is just a narrower version of this one. So if you have a lot of space, you can use the bigger ones, or if you want to make a wider band, use the bigger ones, or you can use the smaller ones. I'm going to go with the smaller one just because we don't have a big top of the tree and I want to use the same one. Now, you could use the bigger ones for like the bottom three and then the smaller one for the top three if you want to do it kind of proportionally. But they all operate the same way, so I'll show you how that works. Have any of you used these tools before?
Yes.
The Wagner tools? You have, okay.
Not Wagner, but similar.
Yeah. So this just rotates, and the texturing comes from the application of pressure. You're applying a fair amount of pressure. The speed should be around 500 RPMs on the lathe or thereabouts. Since I have no idea what the RPMs are on this lathe, I'm gonna guess.
Can you zoom in a little, Tom?
Sure.
Thank you. On the tool? On the tool?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
There we go. Can we show the other ones too? Sure.
As far as I know, those are the only 3 Wagner makes, but if you guys are machinists, or this is not new technology, it's just newer technology in wood turning, I guess.
Don't move.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so the important thing is that the tool rest is back a little further than you would normally have it for tools, because this flat part has to be resting on the tool, and the back of the wheel, you don't want it to be grinding on the tool rest, so you got to give it some room. And you also want to be pressing down and right at about the center line. Okay, so down at about the center line of the piece, otherwise it'll want to go over or under the piece, so you want it to be right about on the center, and you're going to go straight in. And ideally you want to start with it at a little bit where you're like rubbing either the right side or the left side, and then you can kind of flatten it out. We'll do it a few times. The goal is to get a nice kind of clear imprint. Some woods harder than others. The oak didn't take it as well as cherry takes it. These tools do wear out over time, and I have no idea how you'd sharpen these tools. Wagner would be happy to sell you a replacement, I'm sure. So I'm listening to that and thinking, okay, this is probably around 473. So we'll try it. Plus or minus. All right, so I'm going to start right here. If your hand is over the wheel, it's not the end of the world, because the wheel is spinning away from you. It's not spinning towards you. If it was, it would take part of your finger with it. So I'm concentrating about where I want it to be, because I'm going to want to do it like right there and right there and right there at about the same spot, kind of near the bottom, but not too close to the edge where it'll start to shred the edge, right? So I'm going to come in right about here, and I'm trying not to let this thing slip. Okay, that's it. That's the noise that it makes, and it made a pretty nice little design. Remember what I said earlier about the surface speed? As you go here, it gets slower, slower, slower. So you may have to turn this up a little, like to 478 or 479 to make, and the pattern won't be identical. Again, because of the surface speed being different, the wheel is spinning at a different speed. It would be almost impossible. If you had a cylinder, it would be the same. But with a tree, with it tapered, is not going to be the same because of the different surface speeds on this. So, but it'll be close. It'll be close. How fast does that sound to you guys? You good? All right, so trying to space this about as far as I was from the bottom of the last one. And I am pressing in pretty good. Not bad, not bad. Again, I'm pressing down, and with my right hand, I'm pressing straight in at about the center line. And do the next one. You can even hear the difference in the speed. Right?
Yeah. Does it ever not cut it clean, like just doesn't match up, and you need to move it a little to get it?
Yeah. If you have a hard piece, like on that, if I tried this on that honey locust, it's just so hard. Or on a ebony or something hard, you might still get a texture, but you have to work at it. But you can see on this, I don't know if you want to feel free to come up. There's a slightly different pattern based on the speed, that surface speed at each of the levels, right? And that's okay. So I have this other tool that also comes with, actually this came from D-Way tools, because I have some beading tools too. But this is kind of nice to make that little line on each side of the band to define that. And for this, I'm going to turn the speed way up because I want it to be nice and sharp.
So you just frame that in back with that.
I'm sorry?
You're just kind of framing that texturing in with that, huh?
Yeah, just a line on each side. So you see how it defines that space. And it doesn't have to be very deep. Just like I said, kind of fast and get a nice clean cut or clean scrape. So I forgot it. I have a little brush. It's like a natural bristle brush that I'll turn, turn this back on and just, rub it against it, and it'll clean out those fibers in that texturing, because you don't really want to sand it. Even with the 600 grit or something, you don't want to sand over it, but just a little. Do you have any kind of a bristle brush of any type? The thing is, the nylons, this will melt if you leave it on there long enough or fast enough. But you'll see this. You see the little dust coming off of it. It's just enough to clean out those little patterns.
You want air compressor?
Yeah, you could use air too, but the brush works best, at least the first pass. That's cool. I'm going to work on the top of the tree and finish that. So we'll finish that, do a little bit of, there's room to do a little sanding there and a little finishing there, and then parting it off. And typically after I part it off, I'll just use after I part it off, to sand the bottom flat, a little bit of a concave on the bottom of the tree. You can go through several grits. So part it off, you got to figure out how to smooth off. You can do it by hand or with a sander to do that.
You have any trouble with them standing, not being weighted on the bottom?
I'm sorry?
Not being weighted on the bottom, sometimes you have trouble with them standing?
Only when my grandson comes over.
If you make the base broad,
Yeah. And generally, that's what I was kind of saying. I kind of look at this and say it's got to be at least 2/3 the width of this. But if it's really tall, it might need to be a little wider. The taller, you got to have a little bit more of a base. But yeah, play with it. But yeah, you could certainly put a magnet on the bottom and put it on a.
Or draw it out, put a weight in it.
Yeah. All right, so now we're gonna, this is where you could really spend a lot of time and then start to cry. And if your lathe's out of alignment, like your tailstock is not in alignment with things, this is where you find out. Because when the tree parts out and it's going like this from your live center, you know it's not aligned right. So kind of work. Just continue to, I'm kind of trying to lose the wood that I don't need, keeping in mind that I've got some stub things over here. I need to lower this a little bit. Get it kind of close. I always want to have that speed up because slower speed is going to make it rougher. It's not going to... Zoom in. They want you on zoom. All right, well, we zoomed. So if I make a mistake, it's going to be really big, right? It's going to be a big mistake. All right. So here's where, like, if you have a sharp tool handy, a sharp spindle gouge, now you get it. Get it. And I'm just really applying pressure more from side to side rather than straight at it. I don't want this to break off and give me some stringiness on the top. I want to try to get a nice sharp top. I know I've got a little more room in here. Got a little more room in there, but it's got a spring-loaded tip in there, so it's pushing in the side. Now, because it's being held in the jaws, I still feel that it's secure. It's not going to fly out of the chuck. But if it was between centers and that is now separated, then you could have a problem. That's why I love to have that being held in the jaws. Because I'm going to sand it, and you know, I still want to be able to support it by hand and sand it, and you've got a nice sturdy support there. All right. Here's where you can also use a skew. I don't have my small one with me, so I'll just use this. But you can get that. And I still want to try to get a nice taper. There we go. But I can still clean that up just with a little bit of right there.
Oh, they'll be on the tree?
What's that?
Smaller skew. Too late.
So here's where I can still, I'll go to a 240, 320, kind of maybe take that very sharp tip off. Let the sandpaper do its job. Okay, so if you look at it from this side and you got a hole in the middle, then you might want to just take a sharp edge, shorten it a little bit, but try to get a nice taper. That's a defining mark. Now, if I'm going to finish this, you want me to finish this or
Sure.
put some finish on it? Okay. What I typically would do is I have some Deft. This is right out of the can. Deft, this is a semi-gloss. Do you have any paper towel somewhere? I don't want to get your lathe all messed up.
Is that typically sanding sealer?
I'm using it as a sanding sealer.
Well, I've used Deft.
Yes, that you can get this, the sanding sealer,
Underneath
the satin, the semi-gloss, or the gloss. And you don't want to get the water-based Deft.
No.
You want to get the oil-based stuff. And now it's sold as there's a different name for it. It's not Deft, it's like, Ace carries it. And it says the same Deft formula, but it's a different name. So, usually I have a magnet and I hold this right here. I have this here. And I just kind of coat the whole thing. So, again, I'm putting this on pretty liberally because I want it to get in and seal. And you know what? At the end of the day, I really love the smell of Deft in the morning. And my wife will say, "Are you finishing again in the basement? Are you finishing again?"
Yeah.
So with the texturing too, you got to make sure it kind of gets in all the texture and in those lines. The other thing I didn't do, you could, and now I wouldn't because of it's been softened a little bit. You could take a little wire
Oh, go with those.
this really thin wire and just go into those little lines, and that makes it pop even more, you know? Sometimes I like it just the way it is, but if you wanted it to, you could just use a real thin wire and do that. But whenever you use wire, always put a little groove first. Don't just try to hold it on the wood. Put a little line, just a little tiny line. All right, so that would be the extent of it, and then pretty much wipe that off. You know, and I would spend a little bit more time doing that. And then I immediately go to the oil, and you can use your favorite oil. I started using this several years ago. This is birchwood. It's called True Oil. It's a gunstock oil. It's, you know, people who, you know, resurface gun stocks use this. It says gunstock finish. First choice of professionals. This is available at Ace, and I think Woodcraft also carries it. But it's a nice, fast drying oil, and I just put it on with steel wool. I thought I saw, is there some steel wool laying right behind you, on the counter or on the floor? Is there some steel wool? Like a 4/0?
Is that good?
Yeah. Perfect. So I just take a little bit of that, and I just, again, put it on pretty liberally and work it into the wood. So you could use a little brush, you could use a paper towel, whatever, but bless you. You allergic to death?
I think so. I smelled it.
Or steel wool fibers?
Yeah. I don't know why, because I've used it in the past.
So that's pretty much the process that I use, and I would probably put one more coat of oil on this and then leave it overnight. Yeah, but there, you know, there's so much stuff there now. You know, people are using Osmo oil or whatever else, or tung oil, or, you know, whatever oil. You know, you ask 12 turners, they're going to have 12 different oils. This is the one that I just kind of, and I like the way it finishes, you know, and it dries pretty nice and nice color. It doesn't darken things too much.
Yeah, that's nice.
So-
There's good gun stock type things. I
Yeah.
mean, that's such a practical thing. They probably have that pretty figured out.
Right, and I'm thinking if you're using a gun stock, it's getting wet, it's getting oily, it's getting handled. So I mean, if it's good for that,
And I quote, its unique blend of linseed and natural oils dries fast.
yeah. So I mean, it is fairly dry right now.
Thank you.
What did I do with the tool rest here? What did I do?
Behind you?
Okay, so then that's the magic. And then the last thing is,
Mark now?
short of, you know, losing the top of the tree, is kind of losing grip and letting this fly across your shop. So, so I do have one of those Chinese or Japanese band saws. So when I get it close, nice and thin, can part it off. But, and I try again to taper this a little bit underneath the base, so it's a little concave. In order to do that, you have to make sure you have enough room on that side of that wood. That's why I left a little wood. Now I can take that off and angle this tool in a little bit underneath. And again, you know, you guys have your own lathes, you know what it sounds like. You know when to stop. You know when to hold it. There we are. So the only thing left is, you know, so here I would just take a skew or a sharp tool, kind of take that nub off, and then use the sander to sand the bottom nice and a little bit concave. You got a nice thing there. You could wait for it to dry, and then in the morning maybe put a little wax on it, put it on the buffer, wax it up a little bit, give it a little bit of shine, or just kind of buff this up a little bit. If you want to pass that around. Again, we went way overboard, but you guys have been fantastic. Thank you for the questions. I'll come back another time and we'll make some clocks.